You are listening to another No Fair Remembering Stuff, the Tuesday edition of the Professional Left Podcast, and available wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a Patreon button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution to The Professional Left Podcast, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
And it's not safe for work.
I refrained from taking this topic up, honestly, Blue Gal, until I listened to a Never Trump podcast that has become one of the lesser stops on the media career rehab tour. And on this occasion, the guy having his reputation fluffed and folded said a number of things which may give you a clue as to his identity, or maybe not.
This guy says he left the Republican Party in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like right around the time Obama was elected, like at the end of the Iraq war debacle and the economy collapsing and turning out, the entire Republican Party lied us into war, etc. So this person left the Republican Party in 2007 because he, quote, saw all of this stuff coming, unquote.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay.
He's a sage.
This guy also said that all the bad stuff in the Republican Party began in 2007.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Okay. Yeah,
Wait,
okay.
what?
Cool.
Okay. But, this theme is repeated in virtually every Never Trumper's origin story, right? Whether it was 2007 or 2015 or 16 or 17 or whatever, that story of leaving and getting out of the Republican Party is always the point on the timeline when everything went wrong. Everything went wrong and I left. And before that moment, everything was fine. After that moment, things were suddenly so bad that they had no choice. I had to leave. I had to go. And because I had to go, I get to begin a rewarding career blaming both sides.
There's a lot of money in that career, I understand.
There's a huge amount of money in that banana shack, let me tell you.
There is.
This, in turn, is part of a much larger Republican tactic of rewriting the immediate past, of replacing an old lie with a new lie the minute the past becomes inconvenient.
You've noticed that, have you?
I have. Mm-hmm. And an absolutely mint example of this can be found in this op-ed from October of 2010. We're not going to tell you who wrote it or where it was published yet. Just relax and enjoy the feeling of the past being obliterated.
Yes.
As
let
you
it wash
listen.
over you. Just let it wash over you. Like a warm spa of horror. Yes.
I originally read this without knowing who it was. Driftglass provided it to me, and it's pretty remarkable. The article is entitled Tea Party to the Rescue. How the GOP was saved from Bush and the establishment.
Uh-huh.
And it's a dilly, Driftglass.
Dilly and a half, I'd say, Blue Gal. Yep.
Quote, 2 central facts give shape to the historic 2010 election. The first is not understood by Republicans, and the second not admitted by Democrats. The first, the Tea Party is not a threat to the Republican Party. The Tea Party saved the Republican Party. In a broad sense, the Tea Party rescued it from being the fat, unhappy, querulous creature it had become. Now, at this point, in reading this in our rehearsal, Driftglass, I said, wait a minute. David Broder is dead at this point, right?
Right. Who else uses the word querulous a lot?
Querulous, in a
George
sense.
Will? Could it be George Will? It could be George Will.
Yeah, it could have been. It could be. Could be. But, anyway.
No.
A party that didn't remember anymore why it existed or what its historical purpose was. Well, worshiping Ronald Reagan is your historical purpose, Driftglass.
Exactly. Everyone knows that.
The Tea Party, with its energy and earnestness, restored the GOP to itself. Wow.
Strap in, folks. It's a long ride.
Really. We're only going to read one more paragraph, but again, this is pretty amazing. The Tea Party did something the Republican establishment was incapable of doing. It got the party out from under George W. Bush. The Tea Party rejected his administration's. Now you're going to reject something of George W. Bush. What are you going to reject?
Middle name, maybe his
spending,
brother.
overreach, spending, overreach, and immigration proposals.
Oh, okay.
Among other items. Blah, blah, blah. And has become only too willing to say so. Yes, that's true. In doing this, the Tea Party allowed the Republican establishment itself to get out from under Mr. Bush. We had to, boss. It was a political necessity. They released the GOP establishment from its shame cringe.
Yes.
Unquote.
It freed them. It released them from their shame cringe. So
they could say, George W. who?
Yep.
Never heard of him. We're here in the Tea Party.
I wrote a whole thing about that. About the Bush belly sneeches. And what? Now, if George W. Bush was the burden on the backs of this bold new party, who was to blame for all of our woes, Blue Gal? Who was at fault for all the terrible things that were happening? It was one man and one man only. One black man. And his name was Barack Obama. Continuing from the same article, quote, the second fact of 2010 is understood by Republicans, but not admitted by Democrats. It is that this is a fully nationalized election, and at its center, it is about one thing, Barack Obama. This election is about one man, Barack Obama, who, fairly or not, man, that's a pretty load-bearing sentence, represents the following: the status quo, Washington, leftism, Nancy Pelosi, Fannie and Freddie, and deficits in trillions, not billions. Yes, Barack Obama is the deficit guy. Everyone who votes is going to be pretty much voting yay or nay on all of that, and nothing can change that storyline now, unquote. Blue Gal, would you care to reveal to these good people who wrote this garbage and where it was published?
Sure. It was Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal, Driftglass.
It was, wasn't it? It was Peggy Noonan.
Peggy Noonan and 3 Mai Tais wrote this post, yes.
You know who I love more than anybody? I love the Tea Party more than anybody. You know, Ronald Reagan and the Tea Party, basically the same person. I would just love them both and love them so much and curl up. And then she had a column due and she dashed off this crap. This was 2010. And remember, this isn't the person we are actually highlighting in this podcast. This is just a perfect example of how Republican establishment people in the media just blow towards their past the minute it becomes inconvenient. So it's important to remember that all of this shit that Peggy Noonan's writing about was thoroughly rebutted by several hundred posts by us dirty hippies demonstrating that the Tea Party was, in fact, just a rebranding scam designed to get Republicans off the hook for all the shit they had said and done during the Bush administration. And
Peggy Noonan helped.
Oh, she did. She's in there with a shovel. And those hundreds of posts accomplished exactly nothing because too many influential people like Peggy Noonan stood to lose too much if it were true.
And this is where I'm going to interrupt you, Driftglass. And in honor of the new season of Only Murders in the Building, quote an old Steve Martin album. She gets paid for doing this. Yeah,
and she still does. 13 years later, Peggy Noonan is still getting paid to trowel out this kind of swill for the Wall Street Journal, rather. So, and thus, Blue Gal, the age of Bush vanished from the memory of man. But then, just a few years later, funny thing happens. Funny thing happens. The Beltway media collectively decided that the danger of accountability had passed. No one remembered the Bush administration and that the fake Tea Party had, number one, outlived its usefulness, and number two, was becoming a pain in their ass. At which point, very serious conservative pundits from David Brooks to Joe Scarborough suddenly noticed that, oh my God, the Tea Party had never been anything more than the same old batshit GOP base in funny hats after all. Isn't that hilarious, Blue Gal? Isn't that just fucking hilarious?
It was really convenient that it took them 24 months to come up with a poll that proved that.
Right.
And I remember the day that Chris Matthews said, oh, by the way, we have this poll that shows that Tea Party members are actually Republicans who voted Republican their whole life.
Right. And I remember the day Joe Scarborough said, I was looking at the TV down in Florida and seeing those people. And oh my God, those are my constituents. Those are the people that voted for me. David Brooks, and these are all people who swore up and down on the lives of their children, that the Tea Party was some brand new grassroots outfit that had never come into politics before, that had just risen up out of fury over the debt and because this black guy was now president. Although the second half is something they swore.
They never mentioned that. It was all about the debt and taxes. Right.
And once that had outlived its usefulness, they suddenly discovered...
Well, it was going to be a threat to them nominating
personally.
And electing Jeb at some point, right?
And so suddenly, and we forget, of course, the interim period when liberals like us were jumping up and down screaming that, of course, they're just a bunch of fucking Republicans. They're just like the Nazi soldier after World War II. They burned their uniform and pretended they'd never been there, been in Switzerland the whole time. What are you talking about? Well, guess what? We were right, they were wrong, and let's continue, shall we?
That brings us to the topic of today's episode, the Beltway Media Club. And we all know the rules of the Beltway Media Club, don't we, Driftglass?
Yes, we do.
Rule number 1 is there is a club. And rule 2 is dirty fucking hippies are not in the club. And as with Noonan and Brooks and Scarborough and hundreds of others, being a club member means never having to say you're sorry. It's like love in a 1970s cartoon, right? After all, if every time you're horribly wrong, all the other members of the Beltway Media conspire to help you eradicate your past, then what is there to apologize for?
Right.
That never happened.
It never happened. So I'm listening to this guy who was doing his reputational laundry on the Joe Walsh podcast say the most amazing thing. How he saw all this coming in 2007. How in 2015 he predicted that Trump would win the GOP nomination and how everybody laughed at him. Well, not for nothing, but I was writing about Trump being the perfect Republican candidate 2 days after he came down the escalator in 2015 because the GOP had spent 40 years creating a voting base that was the perfect feeding ground for a racist, grifting monster like him. In 2015, I still thought the GOP leadership would be smart enough to buy him off because he was so clearly the party base incarnate. So this guy on Joe Walsh's podcast is making a lot of claims about his powers of political perception and saying things about having an upset tummy about the GOP all the way back in 2007. So you think he and I would be simpatico, right? But we weren't. That's the thing. We weren't simpatico at all. In fact, this guy hated my guts personally and thought my readers were idiots and said so on Twitter repeatedly, which was weird because I was just a nobody blogger in the middle of a cornfield. And at the time, this guy was ABC News's chief political analyst. He was on TV all the time, doing speaking tours and talking his books and hawking his books and so on and so forth.
And to his credit, because he can do basic math, in September of 2015, Matthew Dowd was indeed on an ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos panel, saying that based on the numbers and the historical trends, Donald Trump was probably going to win the Republican nomination. This was the same panel on which Bill Kristol confidently declared that this definitely couldn't happen, while Donna Brazile shook her head and laughed at the very thought of such a thing. That panel is such a perfect bizarro diorama of the before time. There was Bill Kristol, there was Bernie Stan, Katrina vanden Heuvel, whatever happened to her, I don't know. 2015, Donna Brazile was an ABC contributor, and she was one of Hillary Clinton's strategists. And I believe she also had a gig with CNN, which she lost when WikiLeaks revealed that she had leaked debate questions to the Clinton campaign in advance of the debate. Then she went to work at Fox News until she resigned in 2021 and went back to work at ABC. Have we mentioned that there is a club?
There appears to be a club, and you can just stay in it for the rest of your life.
And then there was Matthew Dowd, who is the mystery subject of this episode of No Fair Remembering Stuff, because of all the clowns in the media who have made repeated trips to the Reputation laundromat. Mr. Dowd might hold the record.
Yeah, he's a repeat customer. There is a long article in Salon from 2007 entitled Matthew Dowd's Not So Miraculous Conversion. Is the former Bush pollster a true believer turned dissolution critic, or was he an opportunist from the get-go? And that article brings us up to date to Dowd's bio to that point. And it begins with the story that Matthew Dowd wanted to tell about himself in 2007. Quote, as he tells it, Matthew Dowd's conversion from true believer in George W. Bush to disenchanted critic is a chapter in a pilgrim's progress through the wilderness of this world. His long quest for agape, as related to the New York Times reporter, begins about a decade ago with Dowd in the Slough of Despond, quote, frustrated about Washington, the inability for people to get stuff done, and bridge divides, unquote, when suddenly a great-hearted figure appears who lights a candle in the darkness. It's almost like you fall in love, Dowd professed, but his dreams turn to dross and his faith into doubt. Bush is not the deliverer, but the deceiver. Quote, I had finally come to the conclusion that maybe all these things along do add up, that it's not the same. It's not the person I thought, unquote. But Dowd is unsure whether Bush is a changed man or a captive. Quote, he become more, in my view, secluded and bubbled in, unquote. But then the article goes on to count up the many times Dowd changed his colors and loyalties on the way to becoming a player in national politics and the media. Quote, a more mundane version of Dowd's story begins with a little-known pollster in a state capital laboring for a political party headed for seemingly perpetual minority status. That would be the Democrats. Attached to the conservative wing of the Texas Democrats, Dowd was a partner in the Austin-based Public Strategies PR firm. Along with one of his partners, media consultant Mark McKinnon, who can now be seen incessantly on MSNBC, he seamlessly shifted into the presidential campaign of Governor Bush, unquote. And that's when Dowd apparently sent his conscience away to band camp so that he could serve George Bush's political ambitions. Quote, by 2004, relying on Dowd's numbers, Republicans made gay marriage the most salient issue, exceeding abortion and gun control in its inflammatory potential to mobilize conservatives. Dowd prescribed the strategy for targeting Republican-based voters' anger points, as GOP consultants called them, for maximum turnout. Dowd packaged his vicious tactics as nothing more than the application of basic advertising techniques. His slicing and dicing of wedge issues was no such thing. He explained, he said, just creating a new Republican brand. After Karl Rove executed Dowd's carefully calculated targeting to produce Bush's narrow victory in 2004, Dowd was triumphant. Quote, issues don't matter in presidential campaigns, he exulted in 2005. It's your brand values that matter. For Dowd, facts didn't matter either, only brand identity, unquote.
And I take it brand identity just has to do with straight, white, evangelical Christian Republicans. Yeah. That's your brand.
Your team jersey. What's your team jersey look like? And of course, the other team was full of flip-flopping weirdos like John Kerry, who probably lied about his medals and was a monster. And Dowd was cool with all that shit.
And gay marriage.
Yeah.
And gay marriage, for sure.
He might even be French. We don't know. And again, Matthew Dowd was completely cool with all that, went along with all that, and he won. He was delighted that he won.
Then to hear him tell it came his crisis of faith. And yet this crisis of faith didn't stop him from going to work for the DeVos family when billionaire Richard DeVos tried to buy his way into the Michigan governor's mansion. And he needed a campaign manager who knew what buttons to push. And I'll bet his checks cleared as well.
Oh, I'm sure they were good as gold.
Quote, his campaign against incumbent Democrat Governor Jennifer Granholm was marked by nasty ads, falsely stating, under Governor Granholm's administration, you can stay on welfare as long as you want. These weren't a new paradigm, but old, racial, racist code words.
Mm-hmm.
In December 2007, ABC's Good Morning America unveiled Matthew Dowd as the network's political contributor. From that point until his resignation 13 years later, Dowd was the network's chief political analyst and regular guest on the same networks This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And this is what's so maddening about the Beltway Club.
Yep.
Here we are in August of 2023, and while in conversation with Joe Walsh on the Joe Walsh podcast, Dowd can clearly remember whatever elements of his past that he can now play to his greatest advantage. In 2007, he, quote, saw all of this coming, unquote, which is why he left the Republican Party. In 2015, he predicted that Trump would become the Republican nominee. We know all that. Mm-hmm. And yet, during the most critical period of the most consequential election in modern history, at a time when Matthew Dowd was the public political voice of ABC News. The record of what he was saying and doing has all but been obliterated.
Uh-huh.
Carefully and deliberately erased by Matthew Dowd and buried by his colleagues in the Beltway media.
Yeah, when talking to Walsh about how hard it is to change the minds of Trump voters, Matthew Dowd suddenly veered off into complaining about Democrats being unreasonable.
Of course he did.
This is just this week. Quote, and this is a little jangly, so bear with me. But the first step in it, and I think Democrats have a tendency to get this wrong, I still get, oh, you should shut up. You worked for George W. Bush. He started all of this, so why don't you just go away kind of thing. And my response is, that's a heck of a way to build a team. Yeah, a team. I'm on the team. It's called the Democratic Party. And that's what got me interested in doing this episode of No Fair Remembering stuff, because honestly, I have no idea what Democrats he could possibly be talking about except me.
Yeah, he's making you a straw man with that. He absolutely is.
I mean, personally, and I mean this in a really direct way, me personally is the Democrats that have a problem with all of this.
Yeah.
Because exactly as I predicted it would happen a year before it did, Matthew Dowd's old Bush campaign running buddy, a woman named Nicole Wallace, made sure that Matthew Dowd had a soft place to land at liberal MSNBC after he left ABC News. This is from Adweek, February 2nd, 2022. Quote, Matthew Dowd joins MSNBC as a contributor and political analyst, unquote. And based on my very unscientific survey of Twitter users since he started showing up on MSNBC, he seems very popular. He tells it like it is, Blue Gal. He drops truth bombs like nobody else. He is the best. Why doesn't Matthew Dowd have his own show, for God's sakes? And, you know, small wonder, since he is now telling MSNBC audiences exactly what they want to hear. This was Mr. Dowd in April of 2021 on Nicole Walsh's show, clearly auditioning for a permanent gig on MSNBC. Quote, I'm going to speak some truth. Not to you, Nicole, but maybe other people on other networks, on other platforms, unquote. Okay, so now I'm ready, Matthew Dowd. Knock me out with your truth bomb. Show me some truth. Give it to me. Give it to me good. Quote, we have to stop treating this like this is some game where the opposition on each side is the same. And I thought,
we have to end both siderism, Driftglass. We have to.
You must be fucking kidding me. Really, this has got to be a joke, right? Quote, this is just him going on the same long rant he had on the Nicole Walsh show, that there's some equal value on each side, that we're going to listen to Kevin McCarthy and then we'll listen to Nancy Pelosi, and therefore we did our job. We'll interview Ted Cruz and we'll interview a sane U.S. senator, and we've done our jobs, unquote. Now, at this point in the original timeline, I lost consciousness. Okay?
I was thinking that you might be expecting him to Photoshop David Brooks at this point.
Yeah.
Because...
Just put up I have a David Brooks mask and like tear it off. Guess who it is? But as I lay out on the floor, losing consciousness, Mr. Dowd went right on with his righteous truth bomb. Same guy, same network, same time. Quote, but also us in the media have to stop pretending this as if there are two equal partners in politics that we have to talk to. We don't. You don't talk to crazy people. You don't talk to crazy people, and we have to stop getting into place where we're equal to both sides and we discuss it as if it's some fun game that both players are equally responsible, unquote. And I was flabbergasted. Because
so he went from calling you out for being stupid and your readers don't care about truth.
Right.
To basically co-opting your entire blog.
The entire thing, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And as a forgiving soul, it wouldn't bother me, except he didn't apologize for his bad. Well, I'll talk about that later. But he made no amends for it. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge it. He just pretended it never happened. And suddenly he's a completely different person. And now, while I compose myself, I'm going to ask my wife to read some of the many, many comments Mr. Dowd was making via Twitter in his capacity as the ABC News chief political correspondent just a few years earlier.
And Driftglass has date and time receipts for these tweets. He put these in his blog, and when Matthew Dowd deleted them all from Twitter, Twitter maintained the text,
right?
Where if it was embedded somewhere, even though the tweet was deleted, the text would show up. The text of the tweet would show up in the embed. So he's got these on his blog.
They're all
there with the date. Yeah. And I want to emphasize that the reason you will not find this in any of Matthew Dowd's Twitter archive is that indeed he deleted all of it. We guess it's because he saw that the media winds had shifted and that it had suddenly become more professionally advantageous to be against both-siderism than it was to be the media's leading champion of both sides are equally bad.
Yep.
So we'll start with Matthew Dowd on Twitter, December 10th, 2015. I am optimistic. Trump can easily be an accelerator to disrupt our current corrupt political system. End the duopoly. You might want to stick a pin in that word duopoly because you're going to hear it a lot in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's a big one.
March 8th, 2016. Trump isn't the problem. The problem is the corrupt duopoly of partisanship in America today. June 18th, 2016. I am a common sense conservative who thinks DC and the duopoly party control is sadly broken and can't be trusted. He just really hates Hillary Clinton, doesn't he?
He really, really hated her guts. Yeah. He really did. Yep.
July 13th, 2016. As we move towards the party conventions, the two broken major parties are about to each nominate unelectable candidates. Wow.
Yeah.
Duopoly.
Wow. Duopoly.
I guess duopoly can be an entire sentence for Matthew Dowd at that point.
It's the new woke. It was the woke back then. Mm-hmm.
Then in August of 2016, he said all of this on Twitter. I have worked in both parties. There is no improving them from within. Need to disrupt from without. We just have to disrupt the rigging going on. Need Ubers in politics and governance. Both status quo parties are broken. Saying one is worse than the other isn't helpful. The binary choice supposition is the last argument of a dying duopoly. And that's when he puts in a link to his book. I think it was Country Over Party. Is that what it was called?
Yep. It was all about both sides do it, Blue Gal. Yep.
Every time someone says it is a binary choice, I say that is duopoly defending status quo. Stop. That is what duopoly says to preserve status quo.
Mm-hmm.
In September of 2016, he said, math correct, the duopoly has no interest in uniting the United States, period. Independence! Exclamation point.
Independence! He's an independent, Blue Gal.
And then he puts in another link to his book.
Uh-huh.
Our constitutional democratic republic is strong enough to withstand any president. It isn't strong enough to withstand continued duopoly. So he's saying to those who don't want to vote Hillary, it's okay to vote independent.
Or vote for anybody. Vote for Trump, vote independent. Doesn't matter. Because
doesn't matter. We can withstand anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
October 24th. I think about my family / my country all the time. I am not going to be forced by the duopoly to vote for someone I don't trust. 6 days before Election Day, Matthew Dowd tweets, I have picked a side. America and independence from a broken duopoly. Why don't you try not to be a sheep?
This is, I must emphasize, this is the news director for ABC News, the chief political analyst, who was not just there, but he was everywhere. He was on Twitter. He was doing book tours. He was guests on other shows. And his consistent message and his running buddy, Ron Fournier, was this over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2 days after the election of Donald John Trump to the presidency of the United States of America, November 10th, 2016, Matthew Dowd tweeted this. Join me in putting country over party for independent-minded leadership, and if you are sick of the party duopoly, link to my book.
Yeah. Yep. And then we jump ahead a little bit. Because during the summer of 2021, because I did write a lot about Matthew Dowd and this sort of thing, I noticed that Mr. Dowd had wiped out his entire Twitter archive. That is thousands and thousands of presumably deeply held beliefs he had shared with the public during and after his tenure as ABC News chief political analyst. All just gone like a fart in a forest fire. In fact, as near as I can tell, Mr. Dowd had wiped every single one of his tweets prior to July 25th, 2021, with one weird exception. There was one out there after he was done house cleaning, and finding it felt to me like finding a scorched hinge and a door knocker where an entire Library of Alexandria of shitty takes had once stood and had been burned to the ground. Mm-hmm. So, Years and years of Mr. Dowd's ardent opinions vanished, except for that tiny fraction which now exists only in plain text relics on my blog. If you want them, they're for sale. This was part of the many, many posts I wrote detailing Mr. Dowd's incredibly dishonest and dishonorable reign as one of the all-time kings of both sides do it punditry. A reign which ran through the first couple of years of the Trump administration and then began to slowly fall apart in stages. Stage 1. He and his friend Ron Fournier spent the entire 2015-26 campaign shouting over and over again from every venue available to them that there was no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. None. Zero. Both were equally terrible and a manifestation of, yes, the corrupt duopoly. Stage 2. It was every citizen's duty to disrupt the corrupt duopoly. This meant ignoring any misgivings you might have about Trump, getting rid of any silly notion that Democrats were somehow any better, and voting third party. Only then, once the corrupt duopoly had been destroyed, would our democracy be safe. Stage 3. Holy shit, Trump actually got elected. Well, okay, so what? Who cares? I mean, how much worse could it be than if Hillary had won? After all, GOP base voters are overwhelmingly thoughtful, decent, America-loving patriots, right? And those Trump fanatics, as he referred to them, who are getting so much attention, they're just a tiny, unimportant fringe. And then it started to become clearer and clearer what an epic, racist clusterfuck Trump was going to be, and completely lost to reason most Republican voters actually were. Now, I kept up my regular schedule of "we fucking warned you" posts, and along with the usual insults, I started getting increasingly defensive reactions from Matthew Dowd, like, quote, "let the Clinton stuff go. Trump is president-elect. And let's concentrate on that and future leaders, not on the past." And, quote, "why don't you accept people for where they are in the present?" At that moment, he's literally telling me, stop talking about my past. It's getting very uncomfortable, you remembering shit. Mm-hmm. Then, stage 4, which is, boy, that tiny, unimportant fringe of the GOP sure is getting loud. And this was the moment when Dowd suddenly ran out of impassioned things to say on the subject of the disruption and the corrupt duopoly and both sides do it, and so on and so forth, and very tentatively started making public notice of the fact that just maybe the Republican Party wasn't 100% right in the head. And this was also the moment when Matthew Dowd started instantly blocking anyone who even lightly brushed up against his past, which was suddenly very inconvenient for him to haul around like luggage. This is also the moment when he nuked his entire Twitter archive. Then he started showing up on Nicole Wallace's show as the scourge of both sides do it journalism. Now, let's you and I start heading back to the present time. This is Matthew Dowd in January of 2022. Quote, "There are crazy people in both political parties. The difference is twofold. The crazies are the majority in the GOP, and the GOP crazies lead their elected officials around. In Dem Party, the elected officials try to lead the crazies to a better place." Unquote. This is Matthew Dowd, February 17th, 2023. Quote, "And when other news organizations accommodate the lies and misinformation by presenting two sides of every conversation, then they also contribute to the demise of our democracy." Unquote.
And then this is Dowd with Joe Walsh on the Joe Walsh podcast this week. Quote, "I mean, do I think multi-party system would be great?" And then he took a big puff on a doobie, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They were smoking pot while they were doing this podcast, weren't they?
Yeah. Up in the dorm room. Up in the Never Trump dorm room.
Oh, man. Multi-party system would be great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's not us. We may go through a rise of a third party, but quickly that either goes away or it becomes one of the parties, and then you always have two. And so I think we're going to have two parties, man. Unquote.
What happened to the independent corrupt duopoly disruption?
Corrupt duopoly, we got to bust it open with independent.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have two parties, unquote. Mm-hmm. So in just the span of time between the re-election of George W. Bush in 2004 and today, there have been at least 3 completely different Matthew Dowds. Dowd 1.0 was the architect of George W. Bush's despicable 2004 re-election campaign that targeted gay marriage and slandered John Kerry. Dowd 2.0 was the guy on ABC News, pushing both sides do it, corrupt duopoly, and lying like his life depended on it.
Mm-hmm.
And Dowd 3.0 is currently putting in his bid to become the king of Both Sides Don't. We should send him a bumper sticker.
We really should. Several of them. Yours in Christ, Driftglass. Mm-hmm. And this time he is free to expound at length about the evils of both-siderism from the safety of the little nest that he and his fellow Bush administration dead-enders have made for themselves in the media. A secure little bunker where Mr. Dowd can be sure that none of his colleagues will ever be rude enough to bring up his past without apologies for the damage he personally has done, without making amends, without acknowledging the past at all. Because these conversions aren't really conversions at all. They're just actors changing costumes, and it's all just a show. A show with a set change and costume change and script change, and just like that, Dowd was back on camera playing an entirely different character than the one he had played at his last TV gig just a few years before. He had wiped off the ABC News grease paint, grown a beard, thrown on a pair of Michael Stipes glasses, and bingo, Bill the Butcher is now the great emancipator.
Yep. And I think the through line through all of this is Matthew Dowd's career.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
whatever.
So that's
whatever.
And maybe we're just naive, Driftglass. I mean, this is what Sean Hannity tried to say to Keith Olbermann.
Right.
You know, wouldn't it be funny if our viewers knew we were friends and Keith Olbermann went, "No, we're not.
No, we're not." Well, the difference being that Sean Hannity never changed his costume.
No.
And Matthew Dowd has radically altered what he said at the time were his deepest
core convictions.
Beliefs. Absolutely core convictions. Or I wouldn't be saying this stuff. And he said it loud, and he said it repeatedly, and he said it insultingly. And he, like I said, he attacked me personally.
Yep.
He attacked my readers. He called us stupid. He said we didn't care about the truth. And when it turned out we were right, he just obliterated all of that.
Mm-hmm.
He wiped it out, blocked anyone who mentioned it, and for helping to get Trump elected, and lying about it, and promoting this horrible both sides do it lie, and helping to destroy journalism, and then lying about that and wiping it all off, he was rewarded with another job in the media. You know,
and whether it was just anti-Clinton running through his bloodstream, or it was misogyny, but he was part of a media club of Clinton haters.
Yes,
that trusted that she would win.
That's exactly, you're exactly right. That's
they could spend the entirety of 2016 bashing her, insisting that people should vote third party instead of her, and so that they could come out of 2016 with clean hands.
Right. That was the point.
Despite her winning and depending on her winning for their future career, because then they could continue to say, you know, when she doesn't pass a piece of legislation, when President Hillary Clinton, that thought makes me cry that didn't happen, but you know, when President Hillary Clinton fails on some initiative, Matthew Dowd of Clinton era on Earth 2 can say, see, I told you in 2016.
Told you she'd be a disaster, you know? Trump was right. Maybe Trump was right. Maybe Trump was right. You know, but they were both equally bad. And the whole media treated Hillary Clinton like a job advancement, career advancing piñata.
Yep.
You just keep beating on her, and she keeps pouring candy out, and they keep advancing their career. And it was completely safe. There were going to be no consequences because she was going to win. And when she won, they could spend 4 years kicking her and saying, see, remember, we were tough on her. We weren't like those liberal journalists.
We weren't biased. Yeah.
Look at all those liberal journalists who said Trump, Trump, Trump. David Brooks did exactly the same thing in a shorter version. He wrote a whole column about that I stripped of all of its superfluous words, and it was Trump, Bernie, Trump, Bernie, Trump, Bernie, Trump, Bernie, Trump, Bernie. Trump and Bernie Sanders were, and it was like 14 times.
Exactly the same people.
Exactly the same people. And when Bernie lost, he then pivoted to, like a month later, to Trump, Clinton, Trump, Clinton, Trump, Clinton, Trump, Clinton, Trump, Clinton. Because this is the worst lie of all. Matthew Dowd participated in perpetrating the worst lie of all, which is that both sides were the same. And when it turned out they weren't, he wasn't man enough, he wasn't brave enough, and he wasn't enough of a journalist to readily admit that he'd made a mistake and apologize. Instead, he just changed his makeup, grew a beard, and asked his friend Nicole to put him on TV. And of course she did, because they're all friends. And so now
he's laying down some truth about both-siderism.
I'm going to lay some truth on you, Nicole. Not about you, of course, because you're my very good friend, but about all those other people who were all wrong about stuff. You know, those people. We got to start telling some truth around here. And you know what? Here's the thing. I did, as I said, an informal Twitter survey. And it's just reams of Matthew Dowd makes me cry. He tells it like it is. There's no more honest person than Matthew Dowd. My God, Matthew Dowd is God's gift of journalism. Well, I don't know the journalism, and it goes on and on and on and on, because these people, all MSNBC viewers, have no fucking idea what he was 5 minutes ago. Yeah, and you try to tell them that, and you know what? You know what you get? Look, man, we're all allies now. Can't you just let this shit go? And you know what? Letting this shit go is how we got here. I don't want him.
That's right.
I don't want him run out of town on a rail. I don't want him tarred and feathered. I want him to be fucking honest, because as you've said about Joe Scarborough, Blue Gal.
Yeah.
If he were just honest about what he did.
It's a tragedy that they're not. It is for all of us.
There's an entire trove of information about how journalism and politics really works.
Yep.
That they could tell us about. Why were you this fucking fanatic? And then overnight you became the opposite. How does that work? Well, you know, the president of ABC News told me I had to do it. And so I did it. And I leaned into it. And they paid me a lot of money to do it. And then when that train ran out, they dumped me. And I had to go get a job. And I called my friend Nicole, and she gave me a job. But the condition was, you got to be the exact opposite of everything you were for the last 13 years. I said,
so I deleted my Twitter account and took the money. Yes.
Right. Now,
and you know, you've got kids to put through school. I get that.
Right.
But both Matthew Dowd and Joe Scarborough are at a point in their careers, I'm sorry, where you can afford, you know, $100,000 less a year to be honest with all of us.
Yeah.
And both of them are not ungifted writers. They could put together a book. Both of them are capable of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew Dowd could write a book about the media in 2016 that if he really stripped off all of the facade and told the truth, would be a remarkable book.
Yeah.
Same with Joe Scarborough. Joe Scarborough was apparently a member of Mar-a-Lago in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Knew Trump quite well as a Manhattanite, and could write a really honest book about what a nut this person is, and how dangerous he was, and how there was a quid pro quo. I had to do it, or he was going to out me and my girlfriend.
Mika.
And it would be a remarkable book that everything with Trump is quid pro quo. Not just that, but he blackmails everybody. You know, Joe Scarborough knows what Donald Trump has over Lindsey Graham.
Sure, of course
he does.
Of course he does.
And we won't find out, because these guys have so much self-preservation and love their tax cuts and love their Sub-Zero refrigerators, you know, whatever it is, that they won't give up one iota of their lifestyle to tell the truth.
Well, and if you said if they just drop the facade, I think in Dowd's case, there's nothing but facade.
Yeah.
He's a hollow ad man.
Well, he's an ad man that really likes the paychecks. And he'll take a paycheck from the DeVos family, or ABC News, or George Bush, or whoever.
Or whoever. And he will tell whatever story is necessary to keep himself in whatever job he currently has. And if that story is both sides are terrible, then that's the story he'll tell. If the story is both sides are not terrible, that the Democrats are amazing, that Joe Biden's doing a terrific job, and that's the story he'll tell. Then I don't know if he has any core beliefs. I have never seen any evidence of them, but I have seen that he is perfectly at home in the media ecosphere, where it's not just one of them, it's all of them. They're all this way. And that's why, you know, and honestly, the rest of the people, I know they didn't hire him. It's not their decision. But when every other person slaps on a smile and pretends to nod their head and agree and never talk about his past, I wonder, what else are you lying to me about?
Yeah, right.
What else? And you know what? There is a book that tells all. It's called It Was All a Lie by Stuart Stevens, about the Republican Party has been racist since I was in short pants. I didn't want to see it. I worked for them. I blame myself. I screwed up. I did horrible things, and now I'm trying to make amends. But everything I thought about their party was a fucking lie.
And I know you're very hard on Nicole Wallace. She committed career suicide when she said, "I didn't vote for my boss."
Oh, I know.
You know, so I give her some credit, but she is definitely in a protection racket for her friends in the Bush administration. She is absolutely in the protection racket.
And Dowd isn't the first one. You know, she has been trying to get Steve Schmidt back on the air like 5 times. A guy who keeps setting fire to his own career, stepping on his own dick. Then he gets another chance, and another chance, and another chance. And at the end of all this, I look at this and say, wait a minute. If being against both sides do it journalism is the coin of the realm, aren't there like a bunch of dirty fucking hippies who've been against both sides journalism since 2000 and
We've
before?
got a bumper sticker, people.
Yeah. And this happens over and over again. If you really do care about this stuff, if you do
This really is your important gospel now.
Yeah. There are experts you can talk to.
Yeah,
if you really want to know what the Republican base has been like for 40 years, there are people who've been writing about it for 20 years.
Yeah,
you could ask
not
them.
us. People who are actually bona fide journalists in New York City that you can talk to. Yes.
Well, you can ask us too, because we're pretty good on the microphone.
Speaking of us, Driftglass,
yes.
Don't forget, we really do need more Patreons to make this podcast fly. This is a lot of work, especially for Driftglass.
Yes.
Driftglass wrote this whole script and took him a long time.
And boy, are my arms tired.
Very grateful. Boy, are his arms tired. If you can afford to support us in that way, $5 a month on Patreon, it's patreon.com/proleftpod. We really appreciate it. Thank you for that. And see you next time.
See you next time.
The Professional Left podcast, No Fair Remembering Stuff Tuesday edition, is produced under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2022-23, DGBG Productions.